Visitors thought he was greeting them. But Bob Mallory, the head zookeeper, noticed something was wrong. Seiko, an 8-year-old bobcat who usually hid in the scrub, had pressed himself against the fence, and he wouldn't stop lifting his right paw. Seiko wasn't injured. He wasn't provoked. His tests came back normal, yet the behavior wouldn't stop. There was no smoke, no fire, and no intruder. The vet's checks showed nothing. The security footage was clean until the next morning when more animals started showing the same desperate signals. Within days, animals across the zoo began to fall strangely ill, one after another. Something was terribly wrong, and the zoo had to be evacuated. Somehow, Seiko knew before anyone else. What was this bobcat trying to warn them about? Before we start, hit the like button and make sure to subscribe if you haven't, and hit that notification bell so that you won't miss any new stories. On a bright Saturday in late spring, the Arizona sun poured over the red brick walkways of Desert Ridge Zoo like warm honey. The place was already busy. Strollers squeaking, children waving souvenir cups, grandparents moving at an easy pace with hats pulled low. Near the center of the grounds sat the feline department, a shaded corridor of habitats designed to look like slices of wild country. Scrubland for the bobcats, rock ledges for the cougars, dense brush and climbing platforms for the jaguar. Bob Mallory, head zookeeper for the big cats and wildcats, liked this hour. Mornings were usually calm, predictable. He could hear the rhythm of the zoo. Water pumps, soft public announcements, the occasional delighted gasp when someone spotted a tail flick or a pair of eyes watching from the shade. That morning, though, the rhythm broke. He saw it first out of the corner of his eye, an urgent, repeated motion at the bobcat habitat. Seiko, their 8-year-old male bobcat, was standing close to the mesh fence where he rarely lingered. Seiko was not a front and center animal. He was handsome and healthy, but private by nature, more likely to observe from behind a clump of desert grasses than to perform for a crowd. Now he was pressed up near the viewing rail, tracking a single person in the visitor's lane. And Seiko kept lifting his right paw. Not swatting, not striking, not the impatient pawing of a cat demanding food. This was slower, deliberate. Paw up, pads open toward the fence, then down again. Up, down again, like a signal. Bob's stomach tightened. He stepped closer, keeping his face neutral. Years in animal care had trained him never to make a scene unless he absolutely had to. The crowd was small, just a handful of families. A little boy in a dinosaur shirt leaned forward, whispering, "He's waving at her." Bob followed the child's gaze and found the her. A woman stood alone near the center of the viewing area, about 35, sun hat in her hands like she'd forgotten she was holding it. She wasn't shouting. She wasn't pointing. She wasn't tapping the fence. She wasn't doing any of the things that could agitate a wildcat. She was simply watching Seiko as if her heart had stepped out of her chest and was standing beside her. Seiko lifted his paw again, higher this time, pressing it to the mesh at the exact spot where she stood. Bob's first thought was the same thought any seasoned keeper would have. Is she provoking him in a way I can't see? Some people stared too hard. Some mimicked animal sounds. Some wore scents that could trigger a reaction. Sometimes it was as simple as a glittery purse catching sunlight like prey movement. But the woman wasn't moving at all. And Seiko, steady, focused, almost pleading, kept raising his paw like he needed Bob to notice something. Bob signaled with 2 fingers to a younger keeper, Tessa Grant, who was walking patrol nearby. Tessa's eyes widened as soon as she saw Seiko's behavior. Is he "Okay?" she murmured. "I don't know," Bob said quietly. "But we're going to treat this like it's urgent." He stepped into the viewing lane, voice calm and practiced, the way you speak when you don't want to startle a crowd. "Folks, we're going to do a quick routine check behind the scenes," he announced with an easy smile. "Nothing to worry about. If you'd like to continue on, the otter feeding starts in 10 minutes at the North Pond." People drifted away, grateful for direction. Parents guided kids along. Grandparents nodded and moved on. The woman didn't move. Bob waited until the lane was mostly clear, then approached her with the same careful courtesy he used when dealing with frightened animals. Slow, respectful, no sudden pressure. "Ma'am," he said, "I'm Bob. I oversee this section. I need to ask, have you done anything unusual near the fence? Any loud noises, food, perfumes, anything like that?" Her eyes flicked to Seiko, then back to Bob. They were glossy but steady. "No," she said, voice quiet and slightly rough. "I wouldn't. I used to work here." That stopped Bob cold. "Used to work here?" he echoed. "Volunteer," she corrected and swallowed. "A long time ago." Seiko lifted his paw again, slow, deliberate, pressing it to the mesh right where she stood, like a handshake he couldn't complete. The woman's lips parted, and for a second her composure cracked. "That's him," she whispered, almost like she couldn't believe it. "That's Seiko." Bob kept his expression gentle, but his mind started moving fast. There were behaviors that looked like recognition. There were also neurological issues that could mimic intent. Seizure activity, nerve pain, confusion, vision problems. And there were things that could be happening inside a body long before blood work showed a clear answer. He couldn't gamble with guesswork. "I'm going to ask you to step back a little," he said, "just for safety." She obeyed at once, taking 2 steps away from the rail. Seiko's gaze followed her. His paw rose again, hesitated mid-air, then pressed to the mesh where she had been, as if he couldn't understand why she'd moved away. Bob felt a chill that had nothing to do with air conditioning. He turned to Tessa. "Lock the public gate on this lane and hang the temporarily closed sign," he murmured. "Then call Dr. Ramirez. I want her here now." Within minutes, the feline department shifted from public-friendly calm to quiet emergency mode. Doors clicked shut. Radios stayed low. The staff moved with that particular steady speed that comes from training, fast enough to matter, calm enough to prevent a panic. Dr. Elena Ramirez, the zoo's senior veterinarian, arrived with a small team. She approached Seiko's habitat with quiet authority, her eyes studying his posture, his breathing, his tail, the tiny details a casual observer would miss. Seiko was alert. His pupils looked even. He wasn't stumbling. He wasn't drooling. His ears weren't pinned in rage or fear. But his paw kept rising, again and again, as if it was the only language he had. They moved Seiko into an off-exhibit holding pen, a smaller space where they could safely observe and, if necessary, sedate him for exams. Seiko didn't fight the transfer the way he usually did. That alone made Bob's worry sharpen. Dr. Ramirez ran her hands over the checklist out loud, not because she needed to hear herself talk, but because good teams work best when everyone shares the same map. Check for limping, swelling, fractures. Check paw pads. Check nail beds. Check teeth and gums. Listen to lungs. Palpate abdomen, temperature, heart rate. She glanced at Bob. "Any changes in appetite?" "He ate yesterday," Bob said. "Maybe a little slower than normal, but he finished." They performed a full physical exam under light sedation. They drew blood for a complete panel. They did a neurological assessment. They checked for pain response and looked for subtle signs of infection. They reviewed his diet logs. They inspected the enclosure for sharp edges, toxins, anything that could cause stress or injury. They even pulled security footage to see if any visitor had thrown something into the habitat. Everything came back frustratingly normal. No fever, no obvious injuries, normal blood work, normal imaging, normal stool sample, normal behavior. Except for that paw. Bob stood in the vet bay later that afternoon, staring at the clean results like he could force them to confess. "It doesn't add up," he said. Dr. Ramirez rubbed her forehead. "Animals can be in trouble before tests catch it, or..." She hesitated. "We're missing something environmental." "Environmental?" Bob repeated. "Air quality, dust, aerosolized irritants, something new nearby." She looked past him toward the window. "Any construction going on around the zoo?" Bob's thoughts snapped to the edge of the property where the city had begun roadwork the week before. Heavy machines, dirt piles, the kind of activity that kicked up fine dust even on calm days. "We've had more dust," he admitted. "But the filters?" "We'll check everything," Dr. Ramirez said. "And Bob, about that visitor." Bob's jaw tightened. She said she used to volunteer. She looked like she was seeing a ghost. Dr. Ramirez nodded slowly. "Sometimes animals remember, sometimes they don't. But we shouldn't ignore coincidence." Bob didn't like the word coincidence, because the next day, it wasn't just Seiko. A keeper from the primate house radioed that 2 lemurs were unusually lethargic and sneezing. The aviary reported an owl refusing food. The reptile building noted a strange restlessness among a normally calm group of tortoises. Another cat, an elderly mountain lion, paced in tight, repetitive circles like he couldn't settle. None of it was dramatic enough for the public to notice. But Bob noticed. Dr. Ramirez noticed. And the zoo director, a practical woman named Denise Walker, noticed when 3 different departments used the same word in the same hour. Unusual. They called a closed-door meeting in the staff conference room. No panic, no theatrics, just the tense, quiet awareness that something was moving through the facility like a cold wind. "If this is contagious," Denise said, "we have to think about 2 things: animals and people." Dr. Ramirez laid out the options. It could be a viral respiratory issue. It could be fungal. It could be an airborne irritant. It could be something introduced through feed, though the patterns don't point there yet. Bob thought of Seiko's paw rising over and over. He thought of how Seiko had tracked that one woman like she was an anchor in a storm. "Evacuate," he said suddenly. The room stilled. Denise met his eyes. "Bob, that's a big call." "I know," he said, voice steady. "But if we wait until we're sure, we'll wait too long. If this is air-related, every extra hour the zoo stays open is another hour of exposure for animals and visitors." Dr. Ramirez didn't argue. She looked tired, but resolute. "He's right." Denise exhaled once, sharp and controlled. "Okay, we go to emergency protocol. Calm announcement, no alarmist language. Shut down entry, clear the grounds. Then we lock down the animals and call in outside specialists." It happened with remarkable quiet. A gentle announcement played over speakers. "For the comfort and safety of our animals, Desert Ridge Zoo will be closing early today. Please make your way toward the main gates. Our staff will assist you." Families grumbled a little at first. But then they saw staff guiding people with respectful urgency, and most moved quickly, sensing this wasn't about inconvenience. Outside the gates, the former volunteer was still there. She hadn't gone home. She stood near a patch of shade by the exit, hands clasped so tightly her knuckles looked pale. When she saw Bob, she stepped forward as if she'd been holding herself together by sheer will. "Is he sick?" she asked. "Is Seiko sick?" Bob wanted to tell her not to worry. He wanted to give her a tidy answer, but he didn't have one. "We're being cautious," he said gently. "We're closing early to check the whole facility." Her voice trembled. I knew it. I knew something wasn't right. The way he lifted his paw. He used to do that for me. Bob blinked. "He did?" She nodded, tears finally spilling. "Years ago, when he was a kitten, they brought him in after a wildfire. He was found alone. His paws were burned. He kept trying to be brave, but he was just a baby." Her breath hitched. "I fed him. I sat with him when he cried. And when he was strong enough, I helped train him to lift his paw so the vets could check him without stress. It became our thing. Like a promise that he was safe." The story landed in Bob's chest like a stone. Seiko wasn't waving. Seiko was reaching back for the one memory he trusted. He cleared his throat, voice careful. "What's your name?" "Grace Harper," she said. "I stopped volunteering after my husband got sick. Life pulled me away." She wiped her face, ashamed of the tears but unable to stop them. "I haven't been back in years, but today I woke up and felt like I had to come. I don't know why, I just had to." Bob studied her for a moment. He believed her, not because it sounded mystical. Bob wasn't the type to chase superstition. He believed her because he'd seen the look on Seiko's face. Animals didn't ask for help with theater. They asked with the only tools they had. "Grace," he said, "I need you to do something for me." "Anything." "Go home," he said softly. "And if you feel sick, cough, fever, anything, call your doctor and tell them you were at the zoo today. We're investigating a possible airborne issue." Her eyes widened. "Airborne?" "We don't know yet," Bob said. "But we're treating it seriously." Grace swallowed hard. "And Seiko?" Bob's voice went quiet. "We're going to take care of him." Inside the closed zoo, outside specialists arrived. A state animal health team, an environmental air quality consultant, and an epidemiologist named Dr. Marcus Chen. They moved through buildings collecting samples, air filters, dust from vents, swabs from surfaces, soil near fresh landscaping. They reviewed HVAC performance and recent maintenance logs. They mapped out where animals were showing symptoms and compared it to airflow patterns. The answer, when it came, was both relieving and terrifying. Dr. Chen stood in the conference room with a folder of results. "We're seeing evidence of a rare fungal pathogen in the air samples," he said. "The kind that can be aerosolized in dust." Dr. Ramirez's mouth tightened. "Fungal spores. Likely introduced by disturbed soil from the roadwork," Dr. Chen confirmed. "It's not something most people think about, but in parts of the Southwest, fungal spores can get kicked up when the ground is disrupted. For humans, it often looks like a nasty respiratory illness. For animals, especially those stressed or in enclosed environments, it can hit harder." Bob's mind flashed to Seiko. Quiet, private Seiko, coming forward to the fence, lifting his paw like a siren. So he wasn't having a neurological episode, Bob said hoarsely. No, Dr. Ramirez replied. He was telling you something was wrong. Maybe not in words, but in instinct. Treatment began immediately. Animals with symptoms were moved to cleaner, controlled air holding areas. Antifungal medications were started for those showing respiratory signs. Supportive care followed. Fluids, nutrition, warmth, careful monitoring. Staff wore protective masks and gowns in high-risk buildings. The zoo's ventilation system was upgraded in record time. Stronger filtration, better sealing, negative pressure in sensitive enclosures. And through it all, Seiko declined before he improved. It was the hardest week Bob could remember in his career. Seiko developed a low-grade fever and stopped eating. His breath turned shallow. He lay curled in the corner of his holding pen, not hiding now, just exhausted in the way only a sick animal can be. When Bob came in for night checks, Seiko lifted his paw once, weakly, and let it fall. Bob felt something twist in his chest. He sat on the concrete outside the pen, close enough for Seiko to see him, but not close enough to crowd him. "I'm here," Bob murmured, even though he knew Seiko didn't understand the words. "We heard you." Dr. Ramirez fought for Seiko like she fought for every animal. Calm hands, stubborn hope. She adjusted medications, monitored oxygen levels, and stayed late so often her scrubs looked like a second skin. And then finally, one morning, Seiko stood. He walked to his water bowl and drank on his own. That afternoon, he took a small portion of food. The next day, he ate more. His eyes brightened. His breathing eased. The crisis didn't end all at once. It never does. Recovery came in inches, not miles. But the pattern shifted from sinking to rising. 3 weeks after the evacuation, Desert Ridge Zoo remained closed to the public, but the air was clean. The animals were stable. The symptoms had stopped spreading. The specialists gave cautious clearance for reopening plans. Denise Walker called Bob into her office and slid a paper across the desk. "What's this?" Bob asked. "A new position," Denise said. "Community education and volunteer coordination. We're going to rebuild trust after this. We'll do it with transparency." Bob read the name at the top of the document and felt his throat tighten. Grace Harper. Denise watched him closely. She has experience, she cares, and frankly, after what Seiko did when he saw her. She shook her head. "I think the zoo could use someone who remembers that these animals aren't exhibits. They're lives." Bob nodded once. "She deserves to come back." Opening day arrived under a softer sun. The zoo's gates swung wide again, and visitors returned cautiously, grateful, curious, a little emotional after weeks of closure and rumors. At the Bobcat habitat, a new sign stood beside the viewing rail. It didn't sensationalize. It didn't scare. It simply explained. The zoo had faced an environmental health threat, had responded quickly, had treated affected animals, and had upgraded systems to protect both wildlife and people. Bob stood near the back of the crowd, watching Seiko. Seiko was in the shade at first, as usual. Then he moved forward, slow, deliberate, until he stood at the mesh fence. Grace approached the rail, not alone this time. She stood beside a group of seniors from a local community center, speaking in a calm, warm voice about bobcats. How they lived, how they hunted, how they raised kittens, how they didn't ask for human help unless something had gone terribly wrong. Seiko's eyes found her. And then, in the exact same spot where he had pressed his paw weeks earlier, he lifted it again. Not frantic, not desperate, gentle, A soft, controlled raise of the paw, pads open, as if offering a greeting through the barrier that had once separated survival from loss. Grace didn't touch the mesh. She didn't press forward. She simply lifted her hand near her own chest, palm facing him, respecting the distance, honoring what he was. Her eyes filled, but this time the tears looked different, less like grief, more like gratitude. "Hi, Seiko," she whispered. Seiko held his paw up for a breath, then lowered it, turned, and walked back to his grasses with the calm confidence of an animal who had survived. Bob exhaled slowly, realizing he'd been holding his breath. He had spent his career believing that safety was built from protocols, training, and control. And it was. But that day, he understood something deeper. Safety also came from listening, from taking an animal's strange behavior seriously, from believing that even behind fences and glass, a wild heart could still find a way to say, "Something is wrong." Please see it. Seiko had raised his paw to a visitor, and it had looked at first like a puzzle. It had been a warning. It had been a memory. And in the end, it became something even rarer in a world that often forgets animals have stories of their own. It became a reunion, a recovery, and a quiet promise kept that when the wild reaches out, the right humans will answer.